I do not blame the persons who have reopened this case, nor do I approve of the protests which we have heard against important matters being frequently debated. I think that two things most opposed to good counsel are haste and passion. Haste usually goes hand in hand with folly, and passion with roughness and narrowness of mind. As for the argument that we have heard, that speech ought not to guide actions, the man who uses this argument must either be senseless or self-serving. Senseless if he believes it possible to navigate an uncertain future through any other means than open debate. He is self-serving if, knowing he wants to push through a disgraceful plan, but at the same time is doubting his own ability to argue for a bad cause. He thinks he can just scare the opponents and listeners with well-aimed slander. What is even more intolerable is to accuse a speaker of putting on a show just to be paid for it. If a speaker were only accused of being ignorant, they could lose the debate and still walk away with their honesty intact. But when you charge someone with dishonesty, they are suspected of corruption if they are successful in their address, and if defeated, viewed as both a fool and a rogue. A system like this would not benefit Athens, because the fear it would create would rob the city of its advisors. In fact, if our speakers are to make these kinds of wild accusations, it would be better for the country if they could not speak at all, as we would then make far fewer blunders. The good citizen should win a debate not by frightening his opponents, but by beating them fairly in argument. And a wise city, without over-distinguishing its best advisers with excessive honors, will nevertheless not deprive them of their due, and far from punishing an unlucky counselor, the city will not hold him in disregard. In this way, successful speakers would never be tempted to sacrifice their true beliefs just to ride the wave of populism in the hope of higher honors, and unsuccessful speakers would not feel forced to use tricks to win over the crowd. This is not our way. Besides, the moment that a man is suspected of giving advice, however good, from corrupt motives, we feel such a grudge against him for a bribe we are not sure he will receive, that we deprive the city of a certain benefit. Honest, good advice has thus come to be no less suspected than bad, and as a result, a speaker advocating the most monstrous measures is no more forced to use deceit to win over the people than our best advisers are forced to lie just to be believed. Owing to these clever suspicions, our city, and our city alone, can never be served openly and honestly. Someone who does serve Athens openly is always suspected of secretly serving himself. Still, considering the magnitude of the interests involved, we orators must make it our business to look a little further than you who judge offhand, especially as we, your advisors, are responsible, while you, our audience, are not. For if those who gave the advice and those who took it suffered equally, you would judge more calmly. And it is, whenever the whim of the moment leads you into disaster, you blame the single person who advised you, instead of yourselves and your numerous companions in error. However, I have come forward, neither to oppose nor to accuse in the matter of Mytilene. Indeed, the question before us is not their guilt, but our interests. Even though I hold them guilty, I shall neither advise their death unless it is expedient, nor if they should have claims to mercy shall I recommend it, unless it be clearly for the good of our country. I believe that we are deliberating about the future more than the present. Where Cleon is so positive as to the useful deterrent effect that will follow from executing rebels, I, who consider the interests of the future just as much as he does, argue for the opposite. I urge you not to reject my practical considerations for his baseless arguments. His speech may have the attraction of seeing the more just in your present anger against Mytilene, but we are not in a court of justice. We are in a political assembly, and the question before us is not one of justice, but how to make the Mytileneans politically useful to Athens. Now, of course, nations have sanctioned the penalty of death for many offenses far lighter than this. Still, hope leads some to take the risk, and no one ever puts themselves in peril without an inner conviction that the plan will succeed. Was there ever a city that rebelled without believing that its own resources or its alliances were up to the task? All of us, states as well as individuals, are alike prone to make mistakes, and no law will prevent that. Why else would lawmakers have exhausted the entire list of punishments throughout history, trying to protect themselves from evildoers? It is probable that in the early times, the penalties for the greatest offenses were less severe, but as these were disregarded, and as the death penalty became more common, even that was ignored in the exact same way. Therefore, we have two options. We must either find a punishment even more terrifying than death, or admit that laws and punishments simply do not work as a deterrent, and that as long as poverty gives men the courage of necessity, and wealth fills them with arrogant ambition, and as long as other conditions of life are controlled by some unstoppable, overwhelming passion, people will always be driven to take dangerous risks. Hope and greed, the one leading and the other following, the one conceiving the attempt, the other suggesting how easy it is to succeed, cause the greatest destruction. And although these are invisible forces, they are far stronger than the dangers that can be seen. Luck, too, powerfully helps the illusion, and by the unexpected aid that she sometimes gives, tempts men to take risks with insufficient resources. And this is especially the case with nations, because the stakes played for are the highest. And when all are acting together, each man irrationally exaggerates his own ability. In short, it is impossible to prevent, and only great naivety can hope to prevent, human nature from doing what it has once set its mind upon, by force of law or by any other deterrent force whatsoever. We must not, therefore, adopt a false policy through a belief in the effectiveness of the death punishment, or deny rebels the hope of repenting and making quick atonement of their mistake. Consider for a moment. At present, if a city that has already rebelled realizes that it cannot succeed, it will surrender while it is still able to pay some reparations and pay tribute thereafter. In the other case, what city do you think would not prepare better than is done now, and hold out to the last man against its attackers, if it is all the same whether it surrenders late or soon? And how can it be anything other than costly for us to be forced into the expense of a long siege just because the enemy's surrender is out of the question? And if we, after a long siege, capture the city, we receive the ruined town, from which we can no longer draw the revenue which forms our real strength against our enemies. Therefore, we must not sit as strict judges of the rebels to our own disadvantage, but rather see how by moderate punishment we may be able to profit in the future, and we must make up our minds to look for our protection not to legal terrors, but to careful administration. At the present, we do exactly the opposite. When a free nation, held in subjection by force, rebels, as is only natural, and claims its independence, as soon as they are defeated, we think we have to punish them brutally, although the right approach with free people is not to punish them brutally when they do rebel, but to closely watch them before they rebel, and to prevent them from ever entertaining the idea, and once the rebellion is crushed, to hold as few people responsible for it as possible. Only consider what a blunder you would commit in doing as Cleon recommends. As things are present, in all the cities, the people are your friends, and either do not rebel with the oligarchs, or, if forced to do so, become at once the enemy of the conspirators, so that in the war with the hostile city, you have the masses on your side. But if you butcher the people of Mytilene, who had nothing to do with the rebellion, and who, as soon as they got weapons, of their own free will surrendered the city, if you do this, first you will commit the crime of killing your benefactors, and next you will play directly into the hands of the upper classes, who, when they incite their cities to rebel, will immediately have the people on their side, because you have announced in advance the same punishment for those who are guilty and for those who are not. Even if they were guilty, you ought to pretend not to notice it, in order to avoid alienating the only class still friendly to us. In short, I consider it far more useful for the preservation of our empire voluntarily to put up with injustice than to put to death, however justly, those whom it is our interest to keep alive. As for Cleon's idea that in punishment the claims of justice and self-interest can both be satisfied, facts do not confirm the possibility of such a combination. Confess, therefore, that this is the wisest course, and without conceding too much either to pity or to leniency, by neither of which motives do I, any more than Cleon, wish you to be influenced. Based purely on the clear facts of the case before you, be persuaded by me to put calmly on trial those Mytileneans whose Patres has sent off as guilty, and to leave the rest undisturbed. This is at once best for the future and most terrifying to your enemies, because good strategy against an opponent is superior to the blind attacks of brute force.